here today. I'm a little sleep deprived. I imagine that Damon is too, and there might be a few others. On top of the election yesterday, we had an interesting day at work. I don't know if you saw that there was a wreck on the freeway sometime in the afternoon. It knocked the power out for about 700-800 residents and businesses, including ours, at the IJ. So, and it was just momentary, but it did a number on our internet. So for about 3 to 4 hours, as the poll closing approached, we had no access on the internet, and all the reporters were scrambling. We had, hotspots on Wi-Fi hotspots on our phones. We're cobbling things together. We were running around the room. It was a mess. And then finally settled down and tried to put out a paper. But, so it was kind of an interesting day. But glad to be here. Congratulations to Damon and all the other winners, as well as all the other contestants in races yesterday. It was a good day. A little bit about myself. I've been in newspapers for about 35 years. I started as a reporter at the Davis Enterprise down the road. I bopped around. I worked in Oregon for a while at a community newspaper. Got a wild hair, went to Europe, worked for the Stars and Stripes, where I was an assignment editor there for a couple of years. Landed in Marin. My wife is a Marin native. Raised 3 children here, and I'm really happy here. I was city editor at the IJ. Probably talked with a lot of you, even though I didn't meet you personally. I'm sure I dealt with you on the phone or email. City editor for about 12 years and became editor last year. And it's really interesting to look back at those 35 years. So much change. Even at the time when I first got into newspapers, people were saying, "You're not going to be around in a couple of years. Why are you casting your lot with newspapers?" And I managed to make a go of it. It hasn't been easy these last several years. There have been such massive changes in the communications landscape. Even though I've seen dramatic changes over the past 35 years, I've never seen anything like what's happened in the last few years. And in part, it's the internet. In part, it's a changed economy and people's reading habits and the way we're getting information, accessing information. But the bottom line is people, particularly at the local level, still want news. There's a clamoring for people want to know what's going on in their community. And as long as that exists, and I don't see that going away, I think there will be a newspaper, there will be a website, there will be Facebook and Twitter and any number of social media that will be delivering news to old and young. And we will survive one way or another. The economic model that sustains newspapers is not broken now, but it's not real healthy either. And we're trying to figure out a way to proceed. The IJ is still a going concern. In case you're wondering, we're a profit-making operation. We're actually doing pretty well, but that's come at a cost. Our numbers are fewer. As all of you know, the paper's thinner. There's not as much there. We have a smaller staff. We have the same desires to cover the news as thoroughly and accurately, as honestly, as comprehensively as we ever did, but we can't do it as well. I'm quite open about that. We can't do it as well with fewer people, and that's part of the challenge. Beyond the economic challenge, there's the challenge of how do you cover a thriving, vibrant community like Marin County, and do it in a way that is meaningful. And it comes down a lot to what don't we cover? What kinds of things do we have to sacrifice in order to do the kinds of stories we want to do? And that is a discussion really that goes on in the newsroom every day. We're constantly talking about, not go to this meeting and try to do this instead. And it's a juggling act. And it's it's a challenge. But I love the community where I live. I love the work I'm in, and I love a good challenge. So we're fighting the good fight. So there have been changes, as you've noticed. The IJ is smaller. We're also and we're also doing a lot more online. Our company is now, and it's traded hands over the years, as you know, but we're now run by a company known as Digital First Media. The name kind of says it all. We're putting a lot of resources into what the owners of the company view as the future, which is an audience generally getting their news in a digital fashion, and that could be on their iPhones, it could be on their tablets, it could be, like I said, via Facebook or Twitter, any number of ways. At the same time, we acknowledge that the newspaper is really the engine that drives the economic machine that's still viable. So we have to continue putting out a strong newspaper, but we have to do it as smartly as we can. So we've done some new and different things. We have now a digital editor in our newsroom who works on the website, devoted to the website, devoted to updating Facebook and Twitter. We've got more initiatives like that. We've started just a kind of a fun thing. I don't know if any of you have watched it. It's called Lobby Lounge, where we're bringing musicians into the newsroom, into our lobby of the newsroom, and they're playing some music, and we're putting that online just to kind of reach out to younger folks generally. But this music is great, and I encourage any of you to tune into it, because I think you might like some of it. But we can do that kind of thing now because we're not solely a newspaper. We view ourselves more as a multimedia news operation. So those are some of the kinds of things we're doing. And at the same time, some of you might have noticed or even attended some of the community gatherings we've had in the past year. I started that as a way to basically let people know what we're up to and say the same kinds of things I'm saying right now, and take questions. We went to 4 or 5 different cities, and then we had to sort of suspend it for a while, but I'm hoping to start that up in the fall again, and perhaps we'll focus on very specific subject areas. These sessions have been open-ended, and people have come with all kinds of questions and concerns. I think they've been good. They haven't been extremely well attended, but the people who've come out, I think, have appreciated it. And an effort on our part to not lose touch with the community as we focus on so many different changes and try to figure out how we're going to cover the news in the best way possible. One thing we do know, and that hasn't changed, is our identity, and that's local, local, local. That's what we emphasize above anything. And that's a niche that no one else is focused on as much as we are. So my view is, as long as we continue that focus and try to beat that drum, we'll be okay one way or the other because of that desire for local news. So you may have noticed a few changes in your paper lately. I don't know if you picked it up, and yeah. I could talk a little bit about that now. I anticipate a lot of questions about it, and I'm happy to answer them as candidly as possible, but let me just kind of explain it in a nutshell. So I mentioned Digital First Media. Our company is trying to find ways to put out newspapers most efficiently. And to do that, they've established design centers around the country. We've got about 75 newspapers in the company, and we're divided into various clusters of newspapers. So we're in a group that includes newspapers, at least a dozen newspapers in Northern California, including Monterey, Santa Cruz, stretching all the way up to Eureka, Chico, We have all the papers on the I-80 corridor, they call it, Backville, Vallejo, Woodland, etc. The company has established a design center in Chico, and they are putting together our pages. They helped us with the design. The design is a standard. There's unique aspects of the design, but the design itself is standard across all the different clusters around the country. That is to say, we did not have a lot of say in the size of the print. And that I've been fielding lots of phone calls, I'm reading lots of email, and I hear you loud and clear. I'm writing up a column now that will go in the paper sometime soon that I hope explains this a little more articulately than I'm doing right now. But essentially, they developed this, and it's a standard size. They're looking now, because of the response they're starting to hear in Marin. Also, they heard a lot in Santa Cruz and some of the other properties, looking at a different font that they hope will be easier to read, easier on the eyes. Part of the issue, and I'm not going to defend the size of the print, by the way. I think it's too small as well. But part of the, I think, dramatic difference that it appears to most people on the page stems from the IJ some years back actually increasing the type size larger than most newspapers had. So we made it easier for our readers. The print was larger, there was more space between the lines and between the words, and I think that was, it was good, and I think people liked it. And so, by contrast, what we have now is a significant dramatic difference, and people don't like it. On the other hand, just to let you know, I have heard a lot of people who like it too. I've heard from a lot of people who appreciate the changes. And now that I've become a student of all the responses out there, I've personally read every one of the hundreds of emails I've received and listened to all the phone calls, phone messages. Even the people who dislike the print size acknowledge that a lot of the changes in the way that the paper looks are okay. Now, you may disagree, but I'm hearing a lot about readability. There are other issues as well, a few of the changes we've made, but by and large, that's the biggest thing. And it's tough. I'm working with the design group, but I'm not the one who's calling the shots on this. I'm working with them to try to make it as good as we can make it as readable as possible. Before we came in, I grabbed the New York Times and I just held it up and compared it to the IJ, and we're better than the New York Times. Anyway, I'm happy to answer your questions about it and tell you what I know. But the reason for this change is that by becoming more efficient, by being able at a design center to have paginators produce pages that the IJ could use, a national or international news page, that also the Santa Cruz Sentinel can use and the Monterey County Herald can use, makes it more efficient for us to put out a paper, and by extension allows us to devote more of our time and resources here in Marin to what matters most, which is local. And so that's the concept, that there'll be an efficiency there. Granted, there are a lot of unique pages, unique to Marin County, that they'll be putting out, and we call the shots here in Marin about where the stories are, what kind of stories we're doing, how they look on the page, but they're actually the ones who are placing them on the page. That's where the efficiency comes in. That's the concept. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brad, who I think has a few thoughts about the election, et cetera, and then I'm happy to take any and all questions.
evening IJ on the mean streets of Kentfield. I had a very flat route, which I'm very thankful for. I grew up in Kentfield. I went to Redwood High School, graduated in '71. In fact, last week I was one of their alumni speakers. As building off of what Robert talked about in terms of change, one of the students said, "Do you think the IJ is going to be around in 5 years?" Which is always a tough question, especially as the news business tries to, I guess, find and rebuild its economic equilibrium. And all I could remember was about 5 years ago, there was an editor of one of the local catch websites who basically stood up in front of a group like this and said, "I doubt the IJ will be around in 5 years." Well, catch is sort of a faint shadow of its former self, and we're still around. In fact, when I started this business after graduating from Cal, there was probably 13 very active local newspapers that served Marin. That also included the Chronicle and the Examiner, which had Marin bureaus and actually covered local news. Today, thanks to the changing economics of newspapers, there's not that many strong newspapers in Marin County anymore. And you would think that that would make us feel like we knocked off the competition. But it doesn't. It just means that we're under more pressure to try to do a better job. And as Robert said, those decisions that we have to make every day in terms of what meetings we're going to go to, how we're going to take a small handful of reporters and dispatch them to various stories in Marin is a constant challenge. For instance, one of our reporters, Megan Hansen, covers San Rafael, Larkspur, and Corte Madera. That used to be two distinct beats. In fact, we used to have two reporters covering San Rafael. And she's had to figure out how can she be covering the Larkspur Landing hearing and covering the San Rafael City Council meetings at the same time. Well, I walked in Monday morning and there was a complaint call from the mayor of San Rafael that we weren't doing a good enough job covering this massage ordinance. Meanwhile, Megan's been covering all the Larkspur Landing hearing over Wind Cup and that. So those are the challenges we have to make. She can't be in two places at one time. And she tries, but she can't. And so we try to stay on top of some stuff. And sometimes we make the wrong decisions. For instance, there was a meeting, I guess about a year ago in Strawberry over housing, the issue these days. And we sort of underestimated how many people would be there, and they had a crowd of more than 350 people. And if we had known there were going to be 350 people there, we probably would have been there. But, we've got to figure out, how we, that our guess in terms of how many people are going to show up to a meeting is also one of the factors of whether we're going to be there. It's great to see the coalition in business and great to see it growing. As somebody who's been a reporter, let me go back and tell you some history. I started my career with the ARC newspaper in Tiburon. I was editor and publisher of that paper for 2 or 3 years. Then went to the Marin Suburban newspapers, which are now the Marin Scope papers. And I was managing editor of the Marin Scope papers and editor and manager of the San Rafael News Pointer. And then one night after working weeks and weeks of 80-hour weeks, the IJ called and offered me a job, and I took it, and that was 31 years ago. For the IJ, I've covered almost every single beat. I've done my best to try to avoid the courts. But I've covered every geographical beat at the paper, and I've been on the editorial page for 2 stints, probably totaling more than 10 years. And it's not boring. In fact, if you had asked me on Friday, after dealing with the campaign, you would have heard me say that I was all in favor, I was ready to vote in a benevolent dictatorship. But we've got every day, we run a handful of letters. 2 days a week, we run a lot of letters. And we run 5 or 6 Marin Voice columns, as well as having a well-written column by Dick Spotswood twice a week. Dick and I fight over some of the stuff he says, but I think the IJ is lucky to have somebody who's as well-connected and who really cares about the community writing for us like Dick. The other thing that's important is that every editorial is about a local issue. We figure that people can go to the Cron, they can go to the New York Times, they can go to Huffington Post and read about what Mitch McConnell's doing or something like that, but they can't find an opinion about what the Marin Board of Supervisors is doing, or what the Mill Valley City Council is doing, or how the Nevada Fire Board screwed up the Brown Act again. We see that as the IJ's role. I think it makes the IJ a lot more interesting. Some people, I think, probably would prefer if we write about Putin and the Ukraine, but I think we see our role as covering local news, commenting about the local news, providing a forum for people on local affairs. And I think it's even more important. What's really impressive about today is this collection of letter writers, but people who are willing to take the time to get together and that they care about local civic affairs. And I think even if, like I mentioned, that we don't have as many vibrant newspapers as we once did, you could carry that out to, the Marin United Taxpayers isn't what it used to be. There used to be a Marin County Property Owners Association that would monitor all the Marin Board of Supervisors meetings and all the San Rafael and Nevada City Council meetings in defense of private property rights. Now, you could disagree with that, but still, it's important. And they were the ones who would sit there and say, those fines or those permit fees that you're charging are really out of line. Right now, there's nobody who says that. And I think that's what we're missing. And the fact that this group is so strong is a sign that it's not totally gone, but I don't think it's as strong as it once was. For instance, like the Citizens for Sustainable Pensions, public pensions, which is a grassroots group that's grown in significance over the past few years. I think they've done a good job of filling a void that once had been filled by the Marin United Taxpayers Association. However, their focus is only on public pensions. There's probably a greater need. There are other things that government's spending money on that deserve attention. And while the pension group is providing a great service, I think groups like the coalition are important to as sort of a forum for people to learn about government and express their opinions. So I'm more than willing to field any questions. Robert is too. In Robert's defense, both of us knew that we were going to get flack for the font size, and we had said something, but we didn't have a lot of pre-launch success.
I could see it a mile away.
Yeah.
Font's too big.
Everybody can ask questions except for Dick.
Okay, I already wrote my letter to you complaining about the newspaper, so I won't. I don't know. Is it
Closer
working?
to your mouth. Closer to your mouth.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to eat.
I was
I
saying.
always hear you, Jody.
Oh yes, I'm Jody Morales with
Sorry.
Citizens for Sustainable Pension Plans, not public
I'm
pensions.
sorry.
I already wrote and told you that I think the font is too small, the headlines are too big, and the pictures are too big. And if you reduce the headlines and the pictures, you could increase the font by 30% and it would be perfect. But that's not why what I asked you today. I want to ask you today how you arrive at your endorsements every election cycle. What are your criteria for the candidates to arrive at who you're going to endorse?
It's a scientific process.
Yeah. In fact, some veterans of our endorsement process are sitting in the audience right now. And some have gotten into our endorsements, some haven't. We meet with every candidate. In fact, in November, we met with probably more than 80 candidates, some individually and some in groups. That's a lot of work.
Who's we?
But it's also the IJ editorial board. Now let me explain the IJ editorial board. It's Robert is a member. Our publisher David Rounds, myself, and Reverend Carol Hovis is currently our public member. And we've had a public member for almost 20 years, and they rotate in on like 2 to 3 months stints. In fact, we'll be having to find a successor for Carol in a couple weeks. We invite the candidates in. Some candidates have decided that they don't want the endorsement and they just decline coming in, but everybody does. We ask all the candidates the same questions. I basically make a list of issues that we've covered and ask people about, how are you going to fix the county's pension system? What's your view on high speed on the bullet train? What do you think of the school boundaries in Novato? How are you going to make sure that the Ross Valley sewers don't spill again? Or WinCup, when we had a spirited conversation on WinCup. In fact, one editorial opinion I might share is I think that the incumbents for the Fort Madera Town Council were probably the most fortunate politicians in Marin County that one candidate who challenged them didn't think WinCup was large enough. But because that's every place I go, everybody wants to talk about WinCup. In fact, WinCup's probably getting more PR in terms of its name. Not favorable, but PR. And they don't even own the property anymore. But everybody calls it the WinCup. Anyway, we meet with the candidates, and then we try to every editor can't be at every meeting, but by and large, at most of them, we have all 3 or 4 people. And then we sit down and decide who we're going to endorse based on the answers that they gave to the questions, their behavior during the meetings, which at times I've had to play referee, and how aligned, in some ways, how aligned they are in the editorial positions we've taken. And sometimes it doesn't matter that they agree with us. We trust their judgment, we trust the fact that they do their homework, and we think that they're good leaders. And we're not looking for a robo candidate. Anyway, and the public member doesn't have a vote, but they're always invited to at least attend the meetings and ask questions.
Hi, Brad. Thank you very much for your words. You're very good. I do know that I like you a lot. But when I came here legally from Mexico City 34 years ago, the first thing I saw was the IJ was missing the multicultural section. Not the Spanish section, not only Spanish, the rest of the languages. Now it's worse than ever. We have a large population that is a reality. We cannot ignore it. So I think that I am a businessman. So I know that you are reaching a market in the Latino population in Marin County. So I think that you should add one page, multicultural, and because the Latinos, they don't know nothing about it. They are looking for, and they are taking those ridiculous pamphlets that they are no good. So they need good information and true information.
Well, I know we've talked about doing that, and in fact, the Point Reyes Light used to run a page in
Not for a lack of interest on our part, right? And I agree with you. One of these community sessions that I mentioned, we had it in the canal area in Bidley Park Library. And that very sentiment came out loud and clear among the small group that was there. The problem has to do with just resources and being able to pull that kind of thing off and do it right. And I think we haven't done it for that reason. But I'm certainly open to trying to find a way to make that happen, because I agree with you, it would be a great thing to include at least once a week a page devoted to some of the communities that we don't cover very well.
I'm Jim Snyder. This is directed to you, Robert. This goes along with Jody's comment that had to do with how you actually do go about the process. But I was thinking more along the lines that so many people in Marin County, virtually any county in America, they go to work all day, they come home, they have no idea what's really going on in their own communities, and yet they look at the paper, they see what the endorsements are, and they basically go with the endorsements. If the IJ says it's good or the Chronicle says it's good, it must be good, and I go with that. And I know you go through a lot to come up with these endorsements, but have you ever thought about or think about the fact that the impact that you do have on the community, that many of the endorsements you actually make are the ones that actually get elected or passed if it's a proposition? And does that impact what you're doing? Or do you think about that at all? That the fourth estate is pretty powerful in this county. It's powerful in any county, but I think in this county even more so, as I read some of these endorsements. Does that come up? And, you know, we're pretty good at what we do. We better make it real good.
I'll say a few words on that, and then I'll pass it off to Brad. But you're absolutely right, and we don't verbalize it in that way. But I think there's an understanding that anything we do is going to be scrutinized. Whatever story we write, how we write it, and where we play it on the page is significant. It's going to matter to people because you know we have a certain credibility, and we want to uphold that. And so that underlies all the decisions we make. We feel like we have a real important responsibility in the community. We take it seriously. So we would not like to think that people just blindly vote the way we say we would like them to vote, that they do their own research, that they investigate themselves. But we also know that people, they may trust, they may disagree with us, but they also may trust that we're informed in general. And because of that, we feel like, we can offer at least our point of view. But you want to say that?
Well, one of the reasons we've talked about endorsement policies and the practice, and one of the reasons we do make endorsements is we're commenting in our editorials about local decisions made by decision makers who people have elected. And it seems to be it's a perfect extension that we should also take responsibility for choosing the people who do make those decisions. And that's why one of the big reasons we make endorsements. We're also not under any great confidence that everybody's going to lockstep and follow our endorsements. In fact, we go to great pains to tell people that it's part of their homework process. This is our food for thought from an institution, from a team of a publisher and 2 editors who pay attention to what's going on in the community. And believe me, there are times when our advice has been rejected. And if you read the letters to the editors, the ones that you didn't write, people have no qualms about writing in and saying, "Are you nuts? What were you guys smoking? How could you recommend this person?" And those letters get in. And that's part of the process. If we were like, if our ego was totally tied to our endorsement, you wouldn't see us publishing those letters.
The little opinion question that you often used to have at the bottom of the page, where you could call in. Well, now you have it on the front page, and you can't call in anymore. Evidently, it's just internet. The company decided, and I used to get a kick. I still read it every day, but I used to get a kick out of giving you one opinion.
I'm gonna see what we can do about that. That, you know, that, and there are a number of people who like to register their opinion by phone, and right now that format doesn't exist. So it's one of the many things that I've heard from people who commented on our redesign and a few of the changes we made. So, good point, and stay tuned.
Chris?
Yes. One of the things I'd like to address is the reasonable, affordable, they call it affordable housing, which I think everybody links to welfare housing, which is wrong. It should be reasonable housing. That should be the link to it. You know, it's for pricing people that can afford housing. But what I'm looking at is infill housing. IJ should look at infill housing. My addressing of infill housing is with general contractor. I've done this for over 30-some odd years. And most of our commercial properties are ghost towns now. And the EIR is already there. They're already zoned for that. Why don't we take those empty commercial buildings and use infill for them? So that it doesn't have to approach the idea of taking and building new buildings. So if you can approach that idea. And also I thank you for your grammatical structure when I do speak to you. Thanks.
Thanks, good point.
Excuse me, would you please repeat the question asked because we can't hear very well down here?
He was just suggesting that the whole idea of infill housing is a concept that would go far to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, would go far to increase the supply of affordable or reasonably priced housing in the community. And he was suggesting that that's an issue we ought to take a look at.
Thank you.
Hi, Robert, Brad,
Where are you?
Dick. I cannot think of a team of people that I would not have selected to be heading up the IJ at this moment in time. And that's not because I'm polishing the apple. But what I've noticed about...
Keep polishing.
What I've noticed in recent months and years is that the leader you get, the better you get. And one of the compliments that I'm going to give is about that maybe your job is not so much to always cover facts, but to ask the right questions once we've done the story. And what I've seen in the past year and more, and thanks to Brad, that the opinions I may or may not agree with, but the questions are the right questions, so that it gives us time for thinking. And then eventually there's an article that comes out to either back up the facts or debunk the facts. And so continue doing that. And I know the industry is changing, and this question is for Robert. What does it mean to be young and the music part? And then who is your leadership with the newspaper in terms of percentages in age and sustainability?
I don't have exact big demographic figures on our readership, but suffice to say, it's an older group of older population. I think I asked the same question once of someone in our building who does look at numbers like that, and I think this was several years ago that the median age of our subscriber was in the 60s. You know, over 65, I believe. You know, it's an aging county, and so that's not a big surprise, and it's not a big surprise that the people who are most comfortable with the print version of the news are people who've grown up with it, people like me, like Brad. So that doesn't surprise me at all, but we do know I wish I could answer your question better about who are the people, the 3 to 4 million page viewers on our website, the 400,000 unique visitors to our website every month. Who are they exactly? And they come from all over the world. They're reading our stories on iPhones and tablets and via Facebook, and out of the blue there'll be a pocket in France or Norway. Why are they reading this story? We don't know. That's kind of one of the mysteries of the internet, but we do have enough metrics, metadata, that we can track that and see that to some extent, and our assumption is that they are generally younger than our typical Marin County subscriber. But I would like to get some hard numbers for you. Maybe I'll want to get that together. That would be a good topic for a comment.
And what is well for the music?
Well, might be. I want to bring young musicians in, but that's not it. Not all. We also have had musicians who are in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. But I want people. Generally, the people who are looking at our website tend to be a younger demographic, and also we're putting that music out via YouTube on Facebook and getting hundreds and hundreds of hits there. So my initial hope was, that we could start to engage teenagers, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and much the way, I started reading the comics when I was 8 or 9 years old, and that drew me into the newspaper. Perhaps we can bring younger people to our website, and that can draw them into news and current events, and they can find more there than simply, music.
Lobby Lounge is also, I think, a celebration of the community, and it sort of reinforces the IJ's role. But it's a showcase for some of our homegrown talent, young or old, to sort of give people a chance to hear them and see what I guess maybe the next American Idol is going to be. But it's actually, Robert deserves a lot of credit for this. Robert's much better than I ever was in terms of making sure that the paper just doesn't give you council meetings or cop reports or court reports or the latest political brouhaha. Robert, I think, to his credit, has always done a wonderful job of making sure that the IJ also provides people with those community people stories. People doing interesting things, people, whether it be like carving 300 pumpkins for Halloween, or whether it's collecting old shoes to send to South America. And I think that's important. And it's also, you're not going to read that story in the Chronicle, you're not going to read it in the New York Times, but you're going to read it in the IJ, and I think that's one of the roles we play.
Well, thank you for your news coverage, for your opinion page, and for Spotswood. I want to say
Don't listen.
in my entire lifetime in Marin, I've never seen all the little towns banding together, our entire community aroused and unified in opposition to this onslaught of high-density development. Last week's protest rally of about 800 neighbors, all wearing our red shirts, well covered by television. Now, since I'm an artist, one of those many arts, cultural, and environmental companies defunded by the Marin Community Foundation in 2007, when they announced their strategic plan, Affordable Housing, I would ask you, please, would you look into the role that the Marin Community Foundation is playing in this? As an example, in 2013, they spent $16 million on housing promotion, $15,000 on the arts. Would you give thought to providing investigative reporting on who or what is behind this push for high-density urban development here in suburban Marin?
Yes.
Okay, I'll follow up on that a little bit. This has to do with the issue of accuracy. When I looked at the headline on the IJ on the day following a meeting, it was probably the most well-attended meeting of citizens, concerned citizens in this county, maybe in my entire memory. 700-800 people. Unanimously, virtually unanimously in anger and opposition to the Larkspur Station area plan. A headline was, residents express unease. Now this reflects a prejudicial nature in your coverage, carried all the way down to the use of language that I think is probably a source of discredit for you, and must, as a consequence of it being a discredit for you, must affect, I wouldn't buy the newspaper just looking at it with that particular misstatement of what actually I witnessed as the facts. That's one thing. The second thing is the largest property owner in the county of Marin, the National Park Service, is now in the process of redesigning the entire visitation model for the Muir Woods National Monument. And we have had in southern Marin numerous community meetings with the National Park Service on this issue, even one coming up now on June 18th. And yet there has been no coverage from you, even though we have had coverage on most of the major television networks, and we also have had coverage in the Chronicle. It was on the front page of the Chronicle. And we had no reporters at any of these meetings. We even have here a letter from the Congressman Huffman on this issue that should have been, I think, published in the IJ, expressing his extreme discontent with the National Park Service over their general management plan. And so I'd like you to comment on those two things. First, this dereliction in coverage and this prejudicial aspect to the way you use language to describe these community events. Thank you.
In terms of the Muir Woods, it seems to me we've written about it, but you say we haven't. It seems to me we've addressed it, but certainly it's a community issue that if we haven't done enough on, I can take a look at it and talk to a reporter and editor and see if we can get going on it. It's not that we're trying to put blinders on it and ignore it, but it's possible that we, haven't been as focused on it as we should. So there's that. In terms of that particular headline, I can't, sometimes we miss the mark. I don't agree with you that it stems from a prejudice of the particular headline writer or the particular reporter. I think we have a staff that tries to be as even-handed and fair as possible, but it's also possible that we choose words sometimes that can be read in different ways or semantically, don't convey what you witnessed yourself. And
Myself or virtually everyone who was there.
so that happens, and and we do our best.
Right.
Hi, Luke Tessier. I guess I have to eat the microphone. Hi, Luke Tessier from Tam Valley. So first I wanted to say, I think what you guys are doing is extremely important. As far as, for example, the First Amendment, I think it's the last bastion of freedom. And I don't say that to be simply dramatic. I think it's the only thing that we have left to fix a corrupt system. But what I wanted to say is, I found that there are several areas, and honestly, I thought of this question long before Clayton had his question. There have been several instances where the casting of the issues has been, in my opinion, less than accurate. A major issue is affordable housing versus high-density housing. There was actually a conversation that I had as a candidate a while ago where what I said was, I am against high-density housing, and I was quoted as saying, I'm against affordable housing. That is not a subtle difference at all. That is a substantial, meaningful, and dramatic difference. To say, I am against homes for poor people is a very different statement than to say, I am against the urbanization of Marin. And this is a debate and a conversation that's been going on for quite a while. But I urge you to really consider the difference there. And the retort that I received was, well, it's basically the same thing. And there's a little bit of a tendency to sort of focus on the NIMBY aspects of an issue. And the issue of Muir Woods, one of the things that we're seeing is we talk about the salmon, we talk about the issues of safety, we talk about clogging the central artery, you know, this tiny road that some people call Highway 1, this tiny country lane that's really only designed for small cars, that would become a severe bottleneck in the middle of a major emergency. And yet, what the issue gets cast as, well, the people are concerned about the fact that traffic's going to be worse for them, as opposed to the fact that what we're really talking about is a natural resource. Coho salmon have gone from more than 1,000 to 13. And we're looking at a situation where 600-year-old trees that can't be regrown in a few generations are being subject to visitor loads and forces that can do nothing but harm to them at already. We're looking at a projection from the Park Service of twice the sustainable limit, and yet there's no coverage. And when it is covered, it gets covered as those people in Cam Valley and the gateways that are affected by traffic don't like having the traffic. So I urge you to consider that. An idea for relevance. I personally find that the opinion page is the reason why I renew the paper. There are nice things in the paper, to be sure, but I would be ecstatic if you made the opinion page 5 pages long. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to kill you early, but that's just how I feel. If anything you can do to increase the number of opinions and letters and articles is a great thing.
We have
Believe me, it won't come with staffing.
we have one of the liveliest opinion pages of any local newspaper I've ever seen, and it's a function of people like yourself who care deeply about issues in the community, and they're very engaged. They write lots of letters, lots of longer opinion pieces, and we are happy to serve as the town square.
And then the last suggestion is, as a newspaper, and in fact as pretty much the only newspaper in Marin County that has wide relevance, you have a very interesting opportunity to educate fledgling politicians, backyard politicians, neighborhood politicians, TCSC, community services district candidates, and young people coming out of high school. Anything that you can do to help facilitate that kind of training, helping people to learn things like how to do a newspaper interview properly, how to write a letter for the newspaper properly, and even getting people together who know how to do that and just acting as a facilitator. I realize that resources are very constrained, but anything you can do to help people interface and become an effective contributor to the newspaper and to the Fourth Estate is really a benefit to the entire community, and I think makes people more interested in what's going on. Without politics, frankly, I would have much less motivation to buy the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Good points. Just a quick note on that last point. We do have a long history of bringing interns into the newsroom, who help out and learn the ropes and go out and do great things in the world. There, right now we have, we've connected with Jewish Family and Children's Services, which has a great program in the Bay Area where they actually they employ high school kids and they place them in the workplace. I think there are at least a dozen in Marin. And last year we had 2 students from Redwood High School. This year we'll have 1. We had 1 the year before that. And they supplement their learning experience with seminars and on jobs and proper, etiquette in the workplace and that sort of thing. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to do more of is bring in speakers. We had one of our top investigative reporters as part of our newspaper chain from the East Bay, who came and led a workshop, I think it was in January, on public records, what your rights are, what kinds of public records are available, how to get them, and that sort of thing. And that went over really well. We had over 80 people, and we were turning people away. So I want to try to do that again, probably this fall, if I can set it up. And those are the kinds of things that I think speak to what you're encouraging us to do.
I think we have a very interesting opportunity in Marin because we have a lot of small communities. And we have a lot of people who normally would never consider being involved in politics now wanting to get into because they're looking at their communities and the very way of life that they value and the natural environment that they've sought to protect, in some cases for generations, being threatened to its very core. So I think for the youth, excellent, and for some of us who are also grown-ups or are trying to pretend to be grown-ups, we would really like to have a primer on how to interface correctly and efficiently with the newspaper. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Law, citizen of San Rafael, and I actually have a question. I don't think we've actually had so far. This is a question that I could probably ask of any news entity, and that is, at what point does news continue to be news? At what point do you switch from reporting to maybe a proactive follow-up to reporting? Often we hear of something that's in the news and then it just sort of disappears. And there's no really follow-up, when in fact probably there should be. I'll give you an example. It's a very small one, but there was a pedestrian death on Everton and 3rd in recent months, and yet we've heard nothing about what has happened as a result of that. There's been no changes at the intersection. I have not seen anything manifest at all. We have heard no follow-up at all. It's not a reflection on you, but the question is, at what point would you move from reporting to proactivity on following up a particular incident or event that took place?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're saying if we report on a news event and it's an isolated incident, you're asking about follow-up on that?
Well, no, the question really is a broad one. That was just an example of a broad one. Is when does news no longer become news? You have to make that selection and so on, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not unique to your particular media.
Well, it's a really subjective thing, I think, is what it comes down to, and I think it's often there are stories there are good stories, some of which have been mentioned just in the last few minutes, that sound like news to me. I mean, they sound like pretty good stories, and if we haven't done enough on them, it may be because we're distracted with other other events that we consider newsworthy. So sometimes it takes someone to say, hey, and wave the flag and say, hey, what about this over here? There's a trend happening here. Why aren't you looking at that? I don't know if that gets at your question or not, but there's a big universe of stories and ideas and opinions out there, and it's easy for us to miss something while we're looking the other way. And I think, you know, it takes calling that to the attention of a reporter or an editor if you see that happening.
I've gotten a signal from the chair that there's one more question allowed because I think our speakers have to move on. So I know that a bunch of people would like to speak. What's your position on this? That people, at least half a dozen more. Do you want to allow a little bit more?
Just one more.
If I could just interject and follow up on something that Robert just said. One of the challenges, the big challenges of working for the IJ is that you've got a ton of little towns. You know, you've got 11 towns and cities, and then you have towns within those cities, and it's our job with our limited resources. Where we've got to report news that that addresses the interests of those people who live in all those cities. And let me tell you, I mean, people in Terra-Linda really don't care about a planning issue in the canal area. People in Novato really aren't concerned about a housing project in Fairfax. People in Tiburon often care more about what's going on in San Francisco than they do in downtown Larkspur. And that's our challenge. Our challenge is to get the stories, to report the stories, the local stories, but also to realize that we've got to be able to bridge that gap between the stories that have a countywide interest and those that are purely a local interest. Not that those local interests shouldn't be a concern of somebody from Novato or San Rafael or San Anselmo, but in reality they are. That's a constant challenge that we face at the IJ. When I was working for the weeklies, my advice to the editors was, write the stories the IJ is not going to write. Unfortunately, the editors can't help themselves and they follow the IJ, and so a lot of the good stories that they could be pursuing, they don't cover. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the weeklies are in the shape they're in.
My name is Pam Drew, and I'm from Novato. And Novato, up until this morning, was Judy Arnold's town. But when you reported the news story, there was 93 votes between Tony Schroyer and Judy Arnold. Now, the IJ has been characterizing Novato as the city of rage. And I'm hoping that our behavior as a group, as a town, is no longer a newsworthy story, especially in view of the fact that we've been very successful with our housing element. And you did print a story along that line. We're very thankful for it. But what I'd like to request is for you to headline some story, City of Rage, Kimfield rises up. City of Rage, Larkspur rebels. How about Tiburon? City of Rage, Tiburon ruins meeting, knocks over chairs. Something like that. I would just love it. Rob Rogers gave us that moniker, City of Rage. And we've been trying to live it down ever since. And no matter how positive we get, no matter how successful we get, we're stuck with this adolescent role, the adolescent rebellion, the teenager town. And we've grown up, actually. And one of the things that we recognize is that the biggest story in all of Marin is that all of these little towns need to know about every other little town in order to come together and to guard the quality of life, the open spaces, and so on in this county. Not to prevent people from coming in, but to prevent greed and overpopulation from ruining our county.
I'm not sure there was a question there, and I think I previously addressed it, but it reminded me debate over the new town hall and where it was going to go. Was it going to go on Ned's Way just outside of downtown, or was it going to go in downtown? And the debate went on for like 10 years, and the people who didn't want it downtown felt that it was going to lead to the urbanization of downtown Tiburon. And people felt very strongly about it, and we covered it. At one meeting, a council member compared his own town as Mayberry on acid. And I put it in the paper, and I got all kinds of flack from people. And people in Tiburon were mad. They had a former mayor named Fran Mayberry. She was mad. She had never tried acid in her life. But to tell you the truth, it was one of those quotes that I got, and I wrote it down, and I tucked it under my keyboard, and to this day I still have it. I have the guy's name, and I have that quote. It's probably one of about 6 or 7 that I've kept. But what's interesting is that Fairfax has adopted the Mayberry on acid. There's like bumper stickers that you get. So, I mean, maybe Rage just hasn't caught on yet.
Rick, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, remember the other slogan of "Only in Marin." I guess we have to say that about both of you, that you're doing a good job, and we really appreciate your coming here to be with us today.